When the COVID thing happened about, mid-March, where they went ahead and shut everything down, what were you guys doing? Were you prepping for a week of tests? Did they say, hey, you guys need to get out of the dorms in a week or a couple of days? Like, what happened?
It was really abrupt. They were just kind of like, hey, you know what? We're gonna take your finals. We're gonna take our finals this week, and then turn in your written final like 2 weeks from now and send it to us. It was for us. It was sort of just like, hey, this is what we're doing now, and it was like, oh, okay, and yeah, that's sort of what happened.
For us, UGA was already on spring break, so I was already at my parents' house, and it was declared like a pandemic. And UGA was like, no, we're still going back in session. And so I was planning on getting it, staying out of class for 2 weeks while I had it, and then going back and finishing my classes. And then 4 hours later, they said, never mind, it's all canceled. Rest of the semester online. But
Sophia?
Yeah, there's been there was like an email sent at some point, maybe 2 weeks ago, where they mentioned possibly setting up workshops this summer to discuss how we were gonna come back in the fall. But they haven't. Nothing is certain, I guess, yet. But I think we are supposed to be planning on coming back in the fall.
I mean, is there any idea how school's going to be for you guys in the fall? I mean, that's the thing with me. I had a strong idea of what I was going to walk into in the next school year. You guys don't. Like, how does that feel?
For us, they've already said that I think all of the schools in the UT system actually will have physical classes until Thanksgiving, and then we're going to go back to online for the remainder of the semester. And I don't even trust that will actually be what happens. I think that they could end up sending us home before then. So I mean, I guess we will see, but I don't think that I think it's going to be disorganized when it happens. I don't think that there's a plan in place, because how could there be? Because there's so much uncertainty.
yeah,
Go on.
yeah. I mean, clearly, the school administrations don't really know how it's going to go. They have projections, but they're a little bit futile at the moment. So, like, they're saying that we're going to go back, but I hear my dad, and he's in the same, he does MGA, it's the same system, and they're like, they're just always shooting plans back and forth, like, how can we do this, how can we do that? They're all just trying to figure out what they can do. They have no idea.
So it seems safe to say that COVID-19 is definitely a before and after moment. Maybe not just for you guys, but for everyone. I mean, it is for me. But 9/11 is another before and after moment for millennials. What is your take on 9/11? Do you guys remember it? Any emotional impact?
I don't remember it at all. So
I don't remember it happening, but it had a very strong effect on my household. I was a very small child, and I was with my family. We were visiting in New York City when it happened. The anxiety and the fear that caused in my family was felt throughout my childhood. And at the time, I can tell you, when I was very young, that my father was a conservative, and that was actually kind of bolstered by what happened in with 9/11. It kind of raised his maybe not bolstered, but it kind of raised his fears more. But when he realized that was used to lie us into the war in Iraq, for example, or and a bunch of other things like that, that's when he kind of made a switch over to the Democratic Party. And I was kind of becoming conscious to like the world in general at that time. I was a small kid, and I just remember my dad always yelling about George W. Bush and and you know how he's an idiot and all sorts of stuff. I don't know if you remember, Ryan, but there was like the Jib Jab cartoon.
I do.
With George W. Bush and John Kerry making fun of each other. He showed me that video thinking it was really funny when I was like a little kid, and I'm like, haha, I didn't really know why it was funny.
Right.
I just knew George Bush stupid. Like, so we I did really grow up with, you know, parents yelling about politics quite a bit, and a lot of that you know, centered around America's reaction to 9/11.
All your school life, you pretty much lived in a world post-Columbine where the threat of an active shooter coming in existed. Can you imagine anything else outside of that? How does that impact you guys?
I could imagine a life without worrying about it, because then we just wouldn't have like school shooter drills, and we wouldn't have to be vigilant when people are walking around campus asking where the most densely related spot on campus is, where we wouldn't have to, like, where when you hear gunshots, you just assume they're fireworks. Like, that would all be awesome. I could imagine that.
If you were to see, like, kids running in the hallway or hear a loud noise, would that, like, create, like, utter panic for you guys? Is there some type of post-traumatic stress?
Well, so actually, it was last summer, this kid shot himself in the chem building at UGA. He was being stupid. He had a gun in his pocket, and like the safety was off or something, and he shot himself in the leg. And everyone like ran out of the building. It was like this really big deal. I wasn't in the building, but I go there all the time because of my major. So it was like, yeah, it was sheer panic. And when everyone was like, he shot himself in the leg because his gun safety was off, they were just like, this is frustrating, is mostly it. But
I'd say it was definitely both of that was frustration and like this underlying anxiety that I carried around campus with me for the next, I don't know, like month after that.
Yeah, for sure.
But it definitely, it kind of like fades after a little bit of time. But the worry, I will say, never actually went away. Like, I still sometimes have moments where I'm like, okay, this can still happen today, and it has happened. So
I can kind of remember for like a long time now just having to do drills all the time about like since elementary school, like this is what happens if a shooter comes to your school. And when I first heard about that, I'm like, what like why is that even a thing? You know, when in elementary school, you don't really, why would that ever happen? It was kind of just ridiculous, you know. But as you get older, you realize like that could really happen, and it's just it is a really disturbing thought. And in multiple times in high school, we had false alarms with rumors being spread that a kid was going to do something, and we all had to go and lock down and all of that stuff. And one time there was like an armed robbery near the school, so we had to lock down just in case the guy like came over towards us or whatever. And when that particular time, I was coming back from class, and I was coming back from lunch to class, and no one was at the school. Everyone was locked in the classrooms, and it was like a ghost town or whatever. And it was like, uh-oh, what's happening? And the security guard skirts up in his golf cart, and it's just like, get the fuck in a class right now. Like, sorry for the language, but go hide, go hide right now. And we're like, oh
my gosh.
So, yeah, and it turned out no one, came to the campus, but just like the really like, the anxiety of like this kind of thing can happen.
I don't remember having that type of anxiety before Columbine. It was mostly like social anxiety, like what this kid thinks of me. So like how did that affect your childhood? Like do you feel like most of your childhood was filled with like anxiety and what type of impact did that leave on you guys? The culture of anxiety and fear, the post 9/11 world, at least.
I mean, for me, at least, the school shooter drills, we also did like tornado drills. Like for me, it was just like one and the same. It was just like out of my hands. I couldn't do anything about it. So I remember like as a kid, before I really understood lots of it, I didn't worry about it. I was just like, oh, it's another thing that we watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, for me, it's pretty much the same, but I will say now, I've noticed that when things like this do happen in my community, it kind of instigates conversation about why this is an issue and what we should do now as citizens to, fight things like this from happening again or whatever. I definitely have noticed, like even in my friend groups, when the shooting happened at UGA, we start having these conversations, and the worry goes further than just, oh my gosh, that was scary. It's more about, okay, I want this to change. How do you feel about this? And so on.
And again, I think that kind of plays into this generation being, at least having like a strong hero generation connection. You look at like people like Emma Gonzalez or David Hogg, who are supposedly Gen Z, but they are like, and it was spurred from this gun violence issue, right? And they are some of the most like vocal activists out there, and they have a very large mobilized group of people behind them.
Is March for Our Lives, is that a Gen Z moment? Do you feel that that's your moment, your cultural moment or generational moment?
That's what got me I always cared about politics, but that's what got me in 2016 when Bernie ran the first time. I was pretty young, so I like phone banked and did some things, but I wasn't out there in real life, participating. Often I went to like a rally, but that's about it. But when I saw that those kids, after getting shot at, were still had the bravery after already facing that trauma to face public scrutiny in the way they did, it made me like feel kind of really bad about myself. Like I care about these things, and I can't even be brave enough to actually go out there in the real world after what they faced and what they're doing. So that was kind of that's what made me really jump into this and into that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely for me, it was a big moment.
It definitely seemed, oh, sorry, go on.
No, I kind of wanted to bring up like the difference between when I was a kid and how Abby was saying, we didn't really know what to do. We just sat there and listened and did as we were told during these drills versus now the kids today, like for example, my brother is 12 years old, and with like even just the protest from the other day, he came up to me and he was like, Sofia, this is really messed up. This is really sad stuff. And he's 12. And I'm wondering if maybe like the exposure that they're receiving now is key in like the progression of this, like the latter half of this generation.
Do you guys feel mentioning David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez, do you guys feel that the people who are in your generation and I guess have that spotlight on them, do you feel they're representative? Because I know sometimes with us, like when things are a little bit more peaceful, sometimes the individuals that has their eye on, they are, I guess they're just seen as rich kids or just super individualistic people who don't quite line up with other people their age. So yeah, do you guys feel that they are representative of, I guess, the people you know personally?
Are you saying that Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg are looked at as like, because I think, wasn't that a wealthy area that they're from?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Do they represent a class, or do you think they're representative of all of Gen Z?
I think that Gen Z sort of, I don't really see a lot of Gen Z people talking about or thinking about what class David Hogg or Emma Gonzalez are in, or even really thinking about it. in fact, I think that if you look at what they do, they work with, for instance, a bunch of different people from across the country, like I forget the name, the group, the group's name, but there's a anti-gun violence group in Chicago, for instance, that they work very fervently with, which deals with more like poor, like inner city areas. So I think that I haven't really seen, I don't really get the vibe that anyone really looks at them as, oh, they're just elitist or anything like that.
Millennials are associated with avocado toast, and we're entitled. And I don't think we're the Tide Pod people, right? That may be you guys too, right? You guys all eat Tide Pod, right?
Yeah, all of us.
Okay.
I'm just addicted to it.
But one of the major things that I hear is that you guys were all influenced by the educational leftists, the liberal professors. They planted a lot of thoughts in your head. You've been brainwashed, bamboozled. You don't know what you're talking about.
Totally, we have been. It's 100% true.
Is this? What do you think?
I'm gonna start all the way back with the story that I have about when I was in 5th grade. So this was, and I mean, I guess it's of course relevant that I live in Texas. I went to school in Texas from the point of being in 2nd grade, and then I go to college in Texas now. So the mindset that people have might be a bit different here than it is in other parts of the country, of course. But I remember when I was in 5th grade that we had a teacher for science, just generic science at that point, that was like a really hardline Republican. And she started like one day just going on about how terrible Obama was, and then asked all of us, asked if any of us were Obama supporters, and I was like the only person that raised their hand. So I got bullied for a bit because of that, basically. In the time that I've been in college, most of the professors that I have aren't particularly political. And as I may have mentioned earlier, I mean, I study accounting and finance, which is our business degrees. And it's really interesting how, I would say about half of the professors, probably more than half, 75% of the professors in the College of Business are, you don't really hear much about the social issues, although I did have one professor that was complaining about bathrooms once. But aside from that, they're mostly conservatives. They teach Reaganomics, and until you run into one or two professors that believe in modern monetary theory, which for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's basically the idea that the government can just endlessly spend because they print their own money, which is not conservative economic thought by any means. So, but those are few and far in between. So at least in a College of Business in Arlington, Texas, I find that the idea that college professors are super left-wing and are brainwashing people is not true at all. My experience doesn't go in line with that at all. So
our business college is really conservative too, but the other colleges aren't. I would say they're not conservative necessarily.
I've always felt that professors, at least ones that I've had, have never talked about any type of politics. They actually try to stay away from things like that. So I've never felt influenced by them in any way.
I can say growing up in California that there definitely is a little bit of, kind of the opposite of what Alice was talking about, where like there'd be like one Republican kid, and like sometimes teachers would be outspoken about being Democrat, and there'd be one Republican kid who would say, well, I like Trump or something, and then everyone would be like, oh, what? That's crazy. You know, people would freak out about it. So I think to a certain extent, I think it's more of a regional thing. I don't think there's like a vast leftist conspiracy in education, even though I think there are a lot of leftists in education. That is a thing, but I really don't think there's too much pushing down the throat of that. At my school, there was actually a teacher who got suspended for a few days for comparing Trump to Hitler. So that was like a whole debate that happened in our in high school. It made like national news and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, that was my history teacher. So.
Oh wow.
Yep, Mr. Navarro, man. So I think there, to a certain extent, that there is some of that, but I don't know how across the country that is. It might be a regional thing.
I would say even in Maryland, which is, you know, more blue. I mean, professors generally try to stay away from that. If you did hear anything, it'd be like after class. If you purposely ask them a question, they might just be like, whatever, I'll answer your question.
And that seems to be my experience too. Seems like this is fake news. This whole myth of educational elite pushing their agenda. That's fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news, yes. Misinformation.
I'd agree with that. I had one my political science teacher so far in college. I mean, yeah, he always, whatever position that someone would try to push in class, he would just kind of take the opposite to try and like push you to like make a better argument for whatever like you're saying, you know. He would sort of say the opposite of whatever, just to kind of, he wouldn't really tell you what he believed again unless you talk to him after class and ask him some questions. Or
my guess is that maybe kids, you know, elementary school and teenagers, they don't have an opinion, and then they go to school, college, and then they find themselves and gain an opinion, and then they come back home during the summer, you know, a little bit different. Simple. No conspiracy.
Yeah. And I also think that is just practically like, is an age thing, like whatever positions they do find, like what I mentioned earlier about a lot of alt-right people trying to, I guess, align with libertarians. I think younger people do typically try to find whatever they do trend towards whatever isn't already established. I think that may give a impression that, they're being dragged to, you know, to the left or just outside of the norm, when I think that's just something that young adults do.
And also by certain people, like learning science in science classes, pushing a leftist agenda, like instead of learning some like creationism or something like that. So I do think it's pretty overhyped. I think people come to their own conclusions based off of facts that they learn in education, or at least not facts, but, you know, theories that they learn in education.
Do you guys believe that facts exist? I don't know where I'm going with that question, but it seems like there's so much misinformation out there that it's hard to really know what is a fact, what is...
I think there's definitely facts, but what to do about those facts or what they mean, and like completely change depending on who you ask.
And which channel you're watching, which news channel.
It really, I think, comes down to like, it depends on your value system. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you would ask like a Fox News viewer, for example, like, what do you think of these rioters right now? And they're like, whoa, they're selfish and horrible, and they're, you know, just looking out for themselves, and they're a bunch of thugs, like they say, right? And then you ask, but the truth is that there are riots and there are looting, like that's a fact. But that's how it's interpreted, is like that's how they look at it.
Interpretation.
And then, you know, the more left-wing side of things, they're saying, well, there are material conditions that have led to this unrest, and there hasn't been the proper channels for them to express it through peaceful protest. So this is what inevitably happens, and it's always happened throughout history when that option isn't given to people. So, you know, there is not as much blame put on the protesters themselves and more the conditions that led to it. So
it seems so extreme. Doesn't he, like, where's the investigation? Where, like, are we even sure that all the people throwing trash cans in the windows are part of the protest? You know, that's off the record. Like, we don't even know that. They could be hired actors. So.
There are a lot of reports that,
some
like,
people say it might be the police.
Yeah,
they're taking part in that.
There was just one guy in Minneapolis who was like had like a face mask that like only law enforcement would have, who was like slowly, methodically breaking windows out an auto.
The guy with the black umbrella.
Yeah.
In
the Bay Area, but over in Oakland, there was you know, kind of a similar situation of a guy who like looked like he wasn't part of the protest, like destroying a Starbucks. It's just there is a weird element to that.
Thank you guys for joining us. I didn't even get to the big question. Do you guys even like being called Gen Z? Are you Zoomers? Are you Z? Homeland generation? Are we good with Gen Z right now?
Not Homeland generation. I am fine with Zoomer. I'm fine with Gen Z.
Zoomer.
Okay.
Yeah, Zoomer makes me laugh.
I like Zoomer too. So thank you, Zoomers.
But before Zoom got big.
Yeah.
Whoa,
okay.
It actually works on
Right.
on a bunch of levels now.
Right. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Be continued, because I think I want to have all you guys back in some capacity.
All right.
Thank you, Darius. All right.